Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Carter Gold, your host through this series where we will be rereading through every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis as well as response, and talking about how these chapters connect to the rest of the series. So, if you're new to the manga, if you've read it all before, regardless of your position on Bleach, you're in the right place. As always, we're going to start with a reading of the chapter. We are reading Chapter 36, They Died for Vengeance. A game? You and me? Yes. To help you see this world can do without Soul Reapers. Chapter 36 of Bleach, They Died for Vengeance. Ready! John! Kin! Po! Look! Over there! Darn. You're more tenacious than I thought. One more time. John Gin, boy! Look up there. Ah! I win. So you had to do the cleaning today, Jinta. This isn't over. Nothing's over. It's the best of 3. But you already lost 14 times in a row. Ah, this hurts. I said it's not over. Everybody knows it's the 15th time that counts. Come on, one more. What's the matter, chicken? Ah, it's not fair. Oh, I don't want to play anymore. Ow. What? Whoa, 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 whoa! Mr. Jinto, what are you doing? Nothing, sir, Mr. Tessai. Move it, fools. Oh, what can we do for you, Miss Kajiki? What's the matter? Oh, where's Kisuke? Oh, hello, Miss Kajiki. What can I do for... Ooh! None of your double talk. I called you 100 times and you never responded. You call that customer service? Oh, sorry. We've just been very busy lately. You must have called when we were out of the store. Hey, lady, where's that mean dude with the orangutan hair? Is he your boyfriend? I can't stand that guy. He's snotty. I hope you dumped him. Now, Jinta. Ichigo's probably up to his ears in trouble as we speak. That's why I'm here. There's something I want to ask you. What is it? No way! Oh, why not? Me fight you? Why should I? What's in it for me? Obviously, you've got some issues with Soul Reapers, but that's between you and your psychiatrist. Oh, so you're afraid. No way. I'm so not falling for that. I'm just saying that between you and me, there's no contest. Yes, that's quite true. As I recall, you got your Soul Reaper powers from Rukia, which only makes you a substitute Soul Reaper. Without her guidance, you can't wipe your nose. What did you say? Quincy? I haven't heard that word in a long time. You know what it means? Yes. It brings back memories. It's been, let's see, 200 years since I heard that word. 200 years? Why? What exactly is a Quincy? The Quincy's were a clan dedicated to fighting hollows. They were scattered all over the world at one time. But they all perished 200 years ago. Perished? Yes, people with powers like Ichigo's recognized the existence of hollows. They began to develop their spiritual powers to fight hollows and to vanquish them, just like Soul Reapers. But the Quincy's had very different ideas about how this should be accomplished. Over time, a deep rift developed between the two groups. The crux of it was whether hollows should be cleansed or destroyed. Soul Reapers used the Zanpakuto to cleanse the hollows and send them to Soul Society, but to Quincy's, hollows deserved only destruction. Perhaps it's an understandable sentiment. Hollows devour human souls. They murdered the Quincy's friends and loved ones. Why should they enjoy the peace of the Soul Society? I can't blame the Quincy's entirely. So they insisted on killing the Hollows to avenge their murdered friends. But their actions eventually led to their downfall. Alright, you're on. I'll play your game. No, why do I have to go with Ichigo? I don't want to. If you don't come. Ah! I have a feeling we haven't seen the last of that Quincy person. You may need to become a Soul Reaper all of a sudden. Just in case, take this along. Looks like Rukia's prediction was right on. Khan, you stay there and watch me kick this guy's butt. Okay, let's hear the rules of this game. We'll start with this. Huh? What is that? Hollow bait. After I scatter it, hollows begin to converge on this town. What? Whoever defeats the most hollows in 24 hours wins. Agreed? That should be simple enough, even for you. What are you thinking? No way! Everybody in Karakura will be in danger. What kind of sicko are you? You're starting to bore me. No need to worry about innocent bystanders, because I'm going to kill every hollow that shows up here. And if you really have the guts to protect people from hollows, you'll accept my challenge. Ah, man, this is a lot of pressure. I'm not good in this kind of situation. And that is it for Chapter 36 of the Bleach manga. As we see, we're starting to get a little bit more on Ishida's challenge here. So, let's get into talking about this chapter. Let's talk about both the art as well as the narrative, as always, but also I'm going to give a bit of my personal response too. I think I'll front end kind of how I feel, because we just finished reading the chapter, right? Yeah, all in all, I like this one. I think it's solid. It does a lot to build both the Quincy and, again, the forward momentum of this arc. It's really just laying a bunch of groundwork. But I like the different artistic styles used, and I'll talk a little bit about that going forward. We also get to see a bit of difference in how both Ichigo and Ishida kind of are. I like that this does a pretty good job juxtaposing the two against each other, and I think really works well coming out of the previous arc. So we just had everything with Don Kanoji, where ostensibly they were, Don Kanoji was making a show out of going and dealing with these spirits that, happen to be somewhere, even though he was going about it in a problematic way. But he wasn't like intentionally, drawing these kind of threats to him or whatever, right? He was unintentionally making hollows, but that's a whole other thing. But here we have Ishida, who is intentionally drawing out hollows in order to do. I mean, it is pretty performative, right? It's a game, the way that they say it, right? It's this challenge between Ichigo and Ishida. So there's definitely something there in the way that that's being twisted around, that we're getting to see these different ways that people engage with spirits, especially, and that these characters are being held against Ichigo in pretty stark justification, or juxtaposition, so that we could have a bit of more of a justification for how Ichigo is, right? It's neat. It lets us get a lot of information about these characters and the world as well, like I always say, in a real organic way, because it feels like these are arising out of these characters' desires and out of like a pretty realistic kind of beat for beat story. But yeah, let's get into talking about the art and doing a little bit more of a in-depth analysis here. So we're starting from the previous chapter where Uryu Ishida, he proposed this challenge for Ichigo to see who was better, right? Soul Reapers or Quincy, and of course, Uryu believes that he's going to prove without a doubt that Quincy are more capable. That there isn't a need for Soul Reapers, right? And so that's where we're coming from. I really like this left to right facing on this page. Zoom to get a little bit of a better look. But where we have Ichigo aligned right, and we even have his butt here. But we have Ishida here to the left, and so that's not just Ichigo facing him, but also Ishida facing back. I don't know. It works really well to kind of one, yes, draw your eyes to the page in a natural way from top right to bottom left, which is, as you see, the way the dialogue flows as well. But also as setting these characters in opposition to each other. And it's like a really minor thing, this kind of positioning of characters and the way that dialogue flows throughout a page. But whenever we talk about manga, there are such fundamental things like that you'd be surprised how often, like even big name authors mess that up. So it's cool to see that here, and I'm always going to try to even celebrate those fundamental moments in the art, because it's something that, like, whenever it's pointed out to you, you're like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like, that's normal. Like, of course these characters are going to be arranged in this way. It gives it like the most readability. But even though it seems like such a duh kind of thing, like, obviously, um, like I said, you'd be surprised how many times people get this wrong, and how easily a manga can become visually as well as textually kind of illegible, where it's not clear what text bubbles you should be reading next, or where your eye should be drawn throughout the page. And I mean, that can be used to effect, right? If you want to create a chaotic situation, a lot of characters reacting in a single moment, are you really want to have a moment where you want the person who's reading it for them to, like, really have to take in, like, a whole scene that isn't directed, surely. But most of the time, you want to direct the eye in certain ways, especially throughout the page. And this is, set in such a way that it does that. And I think it's really effective here. The reason why it's used in this way here, not just to have these characters as opposed to each other, and not just to bring you through the page, normally is because it builds, whenever you have that sort of direction, it builds a sort of momentum to your reading. And so it makes these moments move a little bit quicker. So you have the sense of quicker escalation as you're getting this, which, the whole point of this is kind of escalating this conflict between Uryu and Ichigo, right? So, cool stuff, cool way that, like, in very subtle ways, the art is doing a lot of things. It's just the arrangement is doing a lot here to build this conflict, and I love that. This is a great chapter cover. I forgot about this one. I can remember ones like Rock and Future 7, like, that's imprinted in my brain, but I didn't remember They Died for Vengeance being such a cool one with Kisuke here. We get him smoking the pipe, and the clouds kind of almost being like the smoke from his pipe. Of course, we get that crescent moon as we, come to learn. I think this is really evocative of a couple things. Obviously, Kisuke is pretty prominent in this chapter, but we're also coming to learn about this huge conflict that's about to happen because he shattered the Hollow Bait, and now Hollows are going to come down on Karakura Town. So it's a pretty big deal. But They Died for Vengeance is obviously referring to the Quincy themselves, which we hop back. So if you don't know, Junkenpo, or Junkenpoi, Junkenpo, it's rock, paper, scissors, right? And so, the usual deal with rock, paper, scissors is they'll do this sort of, like, look that way sort of thing. And I don't know, like, if you have to, like, guess the way that the person's gonna look or something. Because she looks down and he points to the right, or I guess to his left, towards us. But I mean, it's a kid's game. The whole point is that they're playing this kid's game in order to determine, who's got to do all of the chores around the shop. And Ururu has won several times. So Jinta is, measurably upset. Again, I think it's like a minor kind of world building thing, or I guess not world building so much, character building, right? We're getting Jinta and Ururu positioned against each other, much in the same way that we got Ichigo and Ishida, and, like, they're playing a game. So, as much as, like, Ishida and Uryu are about to challenge each other to this sort of thing that is going to, be a contest between the two of them that decides, which one of them is really better. We immediately get that juxtaposed against these children playing a literal children's game. And so I think in a lot of ways, this is maybe subtly being used to kind of make that connection to like the way that Ishida's going about this is a bit juvenile. Um, but I don't know. This could also just serve as, obviously just a kind of gag moment to bring us into uh, where we've got the Urahara shop to kind of transition there with a bit more of a lighthearted interaction, as Kubo is often to do, right? To interject a bit of levity before we get some of those more serious moments to break them up, to give us these breathers. And of course, we get Jinta being a real bully to Ururu, as is normal. Um, and we learn why they fear Tessai. It's because they're children, and Tessai uh, is a tall, big man. It's like 10 feet, as you know, Rukia comes in here. I speculated a little bit about this before, thinking about Tessai referring to Rukia as like Miss Kuchiki, right, and being really formal with her. But here we do get him calling him Mr. Jinta, right? So maybe Tessai is just very formal with anybody. Maybe that's just how he is around the shop. We get more of Rukia. It's strange. You never think about it, or at least I don't as a fan. I don't think of Rukia like you're really using fools as a catchphrase, but it's you get a lot of that in early Bleach here. Um, she calls Ichigo a fool a lot, and even like sometimes insultingly, sometimes endearingly. So it's kind of interesting. I like that she kicks Tessai in his ass, and then his butt's like granite, so she's like rubbing her foot. Um, yeah, it's all good stuff. Uh, kind of moving forward, this is a gag that I really love. Is she opens the door and we have this very close up of Urahara's face as he is being like all kind of his usual sort of, because we know Urahara's a more serious character, right? But he puts on this face of being a very smiling sort of innocuous character. And so I like that we get this extreme zoom up of him, and then he gets phone thrown in his face. I don't know. That works really well for me. But of course, she's referencing back to we had the previous chapter where Rukia was talking about um, how Kisuke's never there whenever she needs him to be, right? Only he's poking his nose in whenever she doesn't need him to poke his nose in. And so I think this reflects that, right? That she tried calling him 100 times, but he never responded. And of course, he says that they've been very busy, but how much of that's a lie, it's unclear. We get more of this sort of rumors about Ichigo and Rukia dating kind of thing, with Jinta kind of pushing that. It's interesting, one of the big differences between the manga and the anime is that the manga, like, yeah, it does have a few moments between Rukia and Ichigo, but the anime specifically, especially in a lot of its filler, really kind of builds them up as romantic interests, rather than like partners as far as Shinigami go. And I don't know, you get more of a sense of like a guy girl sort of friendship between them in the manga. I feel like they're supporting each other, of course, because of their gender. People are going to insist on like, oh, hey, you guys dating kind of thing. That's a usual kind of tease, especially for being in that age range. I say that for Ichigo at least. Ruki is 10 times his age. So she kind of blows that off or isn't even aware of it, right? She's not even thinking of Ichigo as a dateable candidate, really, I think, which is telling. Whereas Ichigo, yeah, he's a 15-year-old guy. Of course, people are going to speculate that any girl that he's hanging out with is particularly someone he might be romantically interested in. But the manga, I think, always made it pretty clear that Orihime, at least unrequitedly, it seemed, was the more romantic interest sort of character. Even though the anime certainly has a lot of scenes that are put in there. that lean that way. I think that also ends up being the case for a couple of other characters too, but we'll track all of that as we go throughout the series. But it's something to point out because there are certainly some differences between the way the anime depicts these characters and their relationships and the way in which the manga does. And while this is a rereading of the manga, I do want to bring up the anime because I know a lot of people's exposure is only to the anime. So it's worth noting. And again, I think a lot of people are probably returning to the manga because the anime got announced to have its, the last arc, the Thousand Year Blood War arc of the manga adapted. So I know a lot of people are doing a reread or, returning to the series for XYZ reason and might only have anime exposure. But it's important to note here, and I will, highlight the moments that might make you think otherwise, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. Of course, Rukia, we find out the whole reason for Rukia coming here, other than, of course, being really frustrated that she can't get in contact with Kisuke, is about the Quincy. But we hop back to this scene, and, I like that Ichigo's immediately, his immediate response is like that he doesn't care about this, right? That he's being conflict avoidant, which is pretty great. I love that you and your psychiatrist line. But yeah, like we really get the sense, and of course, we get the sense that Ishida is really trying to bait Ichigo into this, right? So he says that he's afraid, and Ichigo's like, oh, I'm not going to fall for that. And then he switches his tactic here, right, as he realizes that's not working. But, the idea of him kind of baiting things out, as obviously he ends up baiting these hollows, it's kind of neat that happens in a couple of ways. But Ishida is this sort of very insistent person that kind of wants to get what he has like this very insistent worldview, right? That Soul Reapers are worthless and that he hates them and that they shouldn't be around and he's going to prove it, right? So there's like there's very clearly something very important there for him that he's very stubbornly kind of clinging to. And so in a lot of ways, it's kind of interesting to think about Ishida as also being, he's a 15-year-old guy. So he's got this kind of conviction that he's being kind of childishly stubborn about. It's interesting, framing it within that kind of that way, because in a lot of ways, like, yeah, he's looking down on Ichigo and he's being a real ass here, but whenever you think about it being kind of juvenile in the way that he isn't mature, right? He's doing all this because he has some insecurity about this. He isn't confident, and he has to project that to like be confident. He has to prove this, right? So we get this kind of glasses push up in this sinister face, right? As he's insulting Ichigo, calling him only a substitute Soul Reaper, and really calling Ichigo out. As we've seen, Ichigo's had quite a lot of growth, but here he's being called out for not being able to do anything individually. And then we kind of get this jump back. We get this mention of Quincy, and so Rukia doesn't know about Quincy because there's clearly a thing that had been around 200 years ago, right? And so with Rukia only being 150 years old, maybe this is some historical thing that hasn't really been taught to her. So that's kind of interesting. But the idea that Quincy's were, they say a clan, but it's like a group of humans, right? They were scattered all over the world. So, like, whenever you think clan, you often think of like a close-knit group, or even like a family. Clan can often refer to a family in a kind of more archaic way. But I think the idea is that there were humans that were all sort of dedicated to these same goals of fighting hollows, right? But this mentioned, they all perished 200 years ago. And of course, she has perished, and then Kisuke brings up that people with powers like Ichigo's recognize the existence of hollows, develop their spiritual powers to fight hollows and to vanquish them, just like Soul Reapers. And so this is a kind of weirdly translated line because he says people with powers like Ichigo's, right? And we know Ichigo to be a Soul Reaper, and I think the idea is less that Ichigo's a Soul Reaper and more like whenever he's saying people with powers like Ichigo's, I think what Kisuke really means here is people who are able to see spirits and perceive hollows, right? People like Don Kanoji is maybe the more accurate one, right? Recognize the existence of hollows, develop their spiritual powers to fight hollows and vanquish them, just like Soul Reapers do. So there's this connection drawn between humans kind of coming into their own means of dealing with hollows the same way Soul Reapers did, but of course there's a distinction in that Soul Reapers send them to Soul Society. And the idea is, of course, Quincy's had different ideas about how this accomplished, and a deep rift developed between the two groups. And here, it's weird, because reading this, and I don't know how much of this is just an issue with the translation, but reading this, you can read this in the way that, like, there are people like Ichigo that developed a series of powers, and then that came a group that was different from the Quincy, and then they disagreed about how to have that interaction. But I don't, knowing Bleach, I know this not to be true. The truth is that whenever he says people with power like Ichigo's, he means the humans that became the Quincy, right? Develop these powers to vanquish hollows. And then whenever he mentions the two groups and the rift dividing between them, he means between Soul Reapers and Quincy. Where essentially the Quincy felt like the hollows should be destroyed, the Soul Reapers felt like the hollows should be cleansed. And so we eventually get that here reflected. Thankfully, the last bit of this page does that here. Again, Ichigo aligned right, Ishida left, both of them in opposition to each other. But, this idea that, Soul Reapers use the Zanpakuto to cleanse hollows in the Soul Society, Quincy feel like the hollows only deserve destruction. So it gets made really clear what the two groups were, is Soul Reapers and Quincy. And here we do get to see, a lot of Quincy kind of around one of their fellows who's been killed, and that they face these hollows. It's fairly evocative. This idea of, I like this is an understandable sentiment, right? The hollows devour human souls. They murder, and so they should be destroyed. And obviously, it ends up throwing a wrench in the larger kind of cosmology of Bleach, because the idea is that hollows are just human souls that have become, twisted in their afterlife, right? And so it seems wrong to just destroy them, right? And remove them from the cycle of reincarnation for that. The same thing goes for, devouring their souls, because I think the implication is that, of course, whenever you cleanse a hollow, that you help the souls that it's devoured kind of pass along as well. That whenever hollows eat souls, they just amalgamate them, like it becomes a part of their soul, but like when a hollow is defeated, all those souls get to pass on, is the way that I've always kind of interpreted that. But, maybe that's not the case. But at the very least, we know that Quincy destroyed these hollows, which is pretty significantly different. It also brings up this kind of this difference in the way in which crime should be punished, right? And this idea of, Quincy really having this very harsh sort of, well, these things are criminal, and therefore, they're doing these horrible things like killing our loved ones. They should be destroyed, right? They shouldn't be given a chance for retribution. Whereas it seems as though Soul Society, at the very least, values the human soul enough, as questionable as the rest of Soul Society's morals are, right? The Shinigami at least value the human soul enough to feel as though it's natural to kind of help it pass along and go through these modes of reincarnation, our sort of spiritual retribution. And so it's like a difference in worldview, right? Though, most of the time, whenever we think about these differences in worldview and atonement, it's interesting, like, whenever you think about, especially a lot of Judeo-Christian, there isn't the idea that you'll be, I guess there ultimately is the idea you'll be reborn, right? And, like, forever down the line, maybe, I don't know. But the idea is that you'll end up in, like, either a heaven or hell sort of scenario. And so there really is eternal damnation versus eternal sort of life in God's kingdom and all of that. And so maybe Quincy represent that sort of bring judgment about this sort of eternal damnation ideology. Whereas typically in these sort of Eastern Buddhist tradition, there's this idea of this sort of karmic cycle, right? Or I say karmic cycle. You can tell I really don't know what I'm talking about if you know about this stuff. But the idea of reincarnation, the idea that you end up in this afterlife and it's not permanent. They might last, comparable to human years, several thousands of years. But the idea is that you end up in an afterlife that sort of fits the kind of life that you led, and that afterlife helps sort of mete out an appropriate, not so much like reward, but an appropriate kind of way of embellishing your soul one way or another. So, if you're bad, you end up in a sort of hell, but the whole point of that is like it's meant to be a way that you atone for the things that you've done, so that whenever you get another shot at this whole life thing, you maybe do it a little bit better. Regardless, the idea is that it's that, like, anything good or whatever isn't a permanent sort of thing, and a lot of, like, the whole idea of nirvana is escaping that cycle, right? But yeah, there's certainly this juxtaposition between these very religiously loaded as well as societally kind of motivated ideas of punishment for a crime versus atonement for a crime, and how much the individual should be held accountable and to what ends. And so that's being brought up here, and certainly Quincy are the more severe of the two, though obviously Shinigami, as we know throughout the story, do quite a few morally reprehensible things of their own. So I think it's more that the Shinigami maybe have more of a value put on human souls than otherwise. Anyway, yeah, their actions led to their downfall, right? So kind of interesting here, and this is implied, but the idea is that, like, right, all the Quincy got wiped out 200 years ago. That there was this strong division between how Quincy handled Hollows versus how Shinigami handled Hollows, right? And their actions led to their downfall is the final word that we get here from Kisuke. And so it's interesting to think about this in terms of how much they're not telling Rukia, right? Because she's 150 years old. She went through her whole Soul Reaper Academy and everything. So very clearly something about history has been covered up, since there was clearly this conflict between Quincy and Shinigami. And so it leads us to believe that maybe Shinigami had a hand in the downfall of the Quincy, and then perhaps just kind of, covered it up historically, or put themselves at the very least in a different light. At the very least, what we know is that despite all of this, and despite the Quincy being all around the world, so it's not like it was like, oh yeah, there was like this small group of like 15 people called the Quincy. Of course you wouldn't know about them. It's like, no, this is like a worldwide sort of institution. And then they were eradicated 200 years ago because of, their actions and how they dealt with Hollows being in juxtaposition to how Shinigami dealt with them, right? So, was this something that, like, Hollows had a hand in? Regardless, Shinigami don't talk about, or Soul Society don't talk about Quincy. It's kind of been left in the dark, at least as far as formal and informal education goes. Rukia doesn't know anything about that. So that's a pretty heavy bit of world building, right? And I think the whole point is that Ruki is sort of having this realization. That's why we have this panel where she's cast in this darkness here with the light coming through the windows. Um, and then of course we cut back to Ichigo. And so kind of interesting here is that these interstitial sort of cuts between the story that Kisuke is telling and the one that is happening between Ichigo and Uryu, that there isn't the typical transitory panels that we see, that we just cut straight to the other panel in the same page. I think the idea is that we're supposed to be sort of getting this as intercut with the other thing rather than actually having a transition from one to the other. One thing I did want to mention art-wise is, yeah, they use this sort of this depiction here. I like this as, like, this Quincy dealing with like fighting this hollow as being kind of an old art piece, right? As maybe representative of like 200 years ago art. It has certainly that kind of what is like those old tapestries or anything kind of drawn just in that two-dimensional sort of way. I say two-dimensional, I mean obviously it's all 2D, but it doesn't have the idea is there isn't really that much depth to the image. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of like I said, those old medieval tapestries are illustrations, like knights fighting dragons and stuff. And I think it's supposed to certainly be evocative of that, or like I get a little bit of Mesoamerican sort of vibes from this artwork too. Thinking about like reliefs, especially those kind of carvings that you do out of a panel, or sculpting. Either way, kind of neat. Like whenever I talk about art, like I think that's certainly supposed to be evocative of this kind of human cultural thing of 200 years ago. But yeah, we finally come back, and of course Ichigo has accepted this. I like that there's this there's a very clear both of them having a thing in their pocket that they reach for. So Ichigo, of course, is going for Cone, and then we get that reflected. I wonder if it's even the same panel. No, it's down here, bottom left. But Ashita reaches into his pocket for the hollow bait. So yeah, kind of interesting. We, of course, we fade to flashback to establish that yes, she left Ichigo with that, with Khan ready to go, and I think the best thing here is especially getting these shots of Uryu just completely unflinching as he sees this. Like he just has disdain for this whole thing. That he's not surprised by any of Ichigo's sort of hopping his soul out of his body or anything like that. Yeah, and we get, of course, pretty good, it's talking about this sort of expression work. I like, the difference between Kon and Ichigo here, but especially Ichigo's expression in relation to Uryu's, which I think the glasses really help to hide his expression in a lot of ways, and then reveal it in these dramatic ways that we've seen. Certainly is a difference to Ichigo's very reactive and expressive face, and I think that kind of helps to paint Uryu in a more antagonistic light as well. But yeah, ultimately it gets revealed here that we're gonna have this big contest with these hollows for 24 hours. And again, like I said, we get this juxtaposition between Ichigo, who's like feels like he realizes that's incredibly, dangerous, and you're going to put all these people in danger just for the sake of this silly competition. And I love that he confronts Uryu with that, and Uryu's reaction is to shatter the bait and, like, I guess essentially use it, and that he's Ichigo's starting to bore him, right? But so much is Uryu's conviction that he's, this greatest hollow defeater guy that there won't be any need to worry because he'll defeat every hollow that shows up, right? And then ultimately the challenge comes. Excuse me. Whoa. Yeah, that's how you know this is completely unedited. You're gonna get the sneezes in there. sneeze cut won't ever happen. Um, never will I cut these down. These are completely unscripted. Jeez. Anyway, but the point is that ultimately what's being challenged is Ichigo's not just his capability to protect people, but that he has the willpower to, right, the guts to protect them. And I mean, this really has pressured Ichigo into a position that he can't just stand aside, which is, yeah, it's kind of messed up. um, it's a real antagonistic dick move on Ishida's part, and like I said, I think it comes from this sort of immaturity and this not having, you might think like, oh, this is a character with a bunch of conviction, like he feels very strongly about these points, but like I said, he doesn't have the confidence that that's just true. He has to prove it, right? So there's some sort of insecurity there. There's something more there that's really driving him to do all of this, rather than just having confidence in this point. Um, yeah, it's kind of a lot, and it builds Ishida to be maybe a more nuanced character, if, like I said, a bit motivated by things that are a bit twisted, especially from Ichigo's perspective. I think we're supposed to feel that way too. But that's all for this chapter. It's mostly these different character interactions, which, as always, I do love them character interactions. But yeah, I don't have much else to say about chapter 36. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. As always, let me know if you noticed anything that I didn't within the chapter or with the art. I'm always interested in that. But without further ado, let's get into spoilers and how this connects to the rest of the series. So with chapter 36 and its connections, there are a few that I want to talk about. Um, Obviously, the idea that the world can do without Soul Reapers, that's a bit of a loaded sentiment. I don't know. Sorry, I had to drink some water there. For those of you that hate the unedited audio of me having to drink water, you'll just have to deal with it. That's what you get. No, going forward here, we have, yeah, this sentiment that the world can do without Soul Reapers, and we're led to believe early on, especially by Soul Reaper propaganda, even that Quincy are bad for the world because they delete souls out of it, right? Um, because Quincy are eradicating these hollows, they're keeping these souls from passing on, and so therefore they're also, and doing that also like disrupts the balance of the world, right? They have that. I'm pretty sure the image they use to explain that is like they have like this cup with the water, right? This vessel, and it overflows or breaks or whatever. Or it has some sort of liquid in it. I don't know if it's water, it might be alcohol. Anyway, the idea being that these realms can only support so many souls, and then whenever that starts to change or get into flux, that might break down the very realms themselves. So we get the idea that maybe Quincy are the anathema, that they were destroyed for that reason. But as we come to find out, of course, Soul Reapers were the ones that existed after Quincy did. Probably. Probably. But that Soul Reapers weren't a foundation of people that always existed. Soul Reapers came to be in response to Hollows existing. So whenever all of the realms were a singular realm, we had characters like Ichibei, and the progenitors of all of the royal families, all of that, kind of starting the Soul Reaper legacy, right? Kind of developing all these techniques and developing a whole means for defeating Hollows. But at the same time, we had Yuha Bach and the whole rise of the Quincy, right? Um, So that's kind of interesting to think about. And obviously, they have the whole idea of the 1,000 Year Blood War is that 1,000 years ago, of course, Yamamoto shut them down, uh, but ultimately, the Quincy leadership, obviously, Yuha went to rest more or less to regain his powers, but the entire rest of the Quincy also hid within the shadowed realm, right? Or at least whenever I say the rest of the Quincy, I mean, all the ones that were involved in Yuha Box sort of work. But clearly there were still Quincy around until 200 years ago. So at some point, Mayuri as well as others were involved in kind of wiping them all out for good. Or, wink for good, because clearly Ryukin and Masaki and uh, Uryu are all around still, so they're still, and I guess Ryukin's wife, whose name is not coming to me right now, but they were all clearly still around. But the whole point of this is that the world can do without Soul Reapers, right? That Soul Reapers as an institution existed only afterwards, and the world was perfectly fine before then, and that Quincy could have just defeated all of the Hollows. And I mean, in a lot of ways, that's what the Soul King was doing, and Yuhabak as his son kind of continued that legacy of eradicating Hollows. And that the Soul Reapers ultimately kind of built a society and the structure of reality around their own rule. So it's kind of interesting that like Ishida is so like in Yuha Box wheelhouse at the beginning of the series, that like he's like really like, I guess, Quincy red pilled, if you'll pardon that. But like the idea that he's so like he understands that sort of the Quincy propaganda, right? That Soul Reapers are, like this sort of menace, and that Soul Society doesn't really need to exist. But I don't know how much, Ishida's really aware of all of that. I think moreover that he just kind of has all these teachings. Obviously his grandfather tried to teach him, to be kind and everything like that. But I think this idea that the world can do without Soul Reapers really is resonant with the overarching kind of Quincy ideal that put them in juxtaposition to Soul Reapers and in war with them. So that's kind of interesting. And yeah, they died for vengeance. Really talking about, the Quincy, right? That they died trying to get revenge. And maybe even, it's weird that like they like even Kisuke kind of builds it in this light, but like is clearly keeping from Rukia the fact that no, we as Shinigami eradicated this entire people because we wanted to essentially have a not just control over reality, but also we wanted to be the only ones with power, which is kind of fucked, but that's just how it is. Here we get a wonderful Hunter x Hunter reference. I don't think so, but Jarkin Poe being Gon's whole signature technique. Here Rukia tries the boot in the ass technique that Ichigo is so capable of using, but she doesn't know how to do it against people that have hard butts like Tessai. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I really want to connect. I mean, I talked about a lot of the Quincy stuff there. It's interesting that obviously the idea of a substitute Soul Reaper gets brought up here, which is pretty interesting. Because substitute Soul Reapers are totally a thing, at least as far as Ichigo and Genjo are concerned. So that's kind of neat. But I think really Ishida's calling out a lot of the things that end up being Ichigo's like shortcomings, right? Like fear. That comes up a lot for Ichigo, especially whenever he starts to face down even more and more powerful opponents that are threatening him and all of his friends, he has a lot of these kind of moments of fear. And then, this idea that he needs to rely on these other people, and without their guidance, he can't do anything on his own. So that sense of like him not being powerful enough himself, which also is kind of connected to that fear, and then that being a sort of thing that bothers him. I think there's another one that we'll get to in a little bit. But obviously Tessai and Urahara are very familiar with Quincy because they were a part of the research and development division, which, as you know, Mayuri being in the head of, I think it's the 12th, right? Could have that wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's the 12th. Either that or that's Gonpachi's, but I don't remember off the top of my head. Regardless, whole point is that, they of course would be very familiar with what Mayuri did and with the Quincy. And clearly Urahara is very familiar with the Quincy, as he dealt with Misaki. So it's kind of interesting. And yeah, this is the other thing that I wanted to mention about is this little story Urahara tells, right? The Quincy's were a clan that dedicated to falling hollows that scattered all over the world at one time, perished 200 years ago. Obviously, he knows that that's not true, but this is sort of what he's holding up, is that they all perish, being the kind of thing of like, oh, we thought we got rid of all of them. But definitely Urahara knows, like, living in this town, he must know that Ryuken's alive, right? Like, he's got to know about Ryuken and Ishida, but at the very least he knew about Misaki. But reading this line, people with powers like Ichigo's recognize the existence of hollows and develop their spiritual powers to fight the hollows and vanquish them, just like Soul Reapers. I love this aligning with Ichigo with the Quincy yet again, right? So, I mentioned a couple different ways in which Ichigo is kind of made out to have Quincy powers pretty early on. But here we get a very direct, like, people with powers like Ichigo's ended up becoming the Quincy. Wink. Like, yeah, whatever you think, like, there's people that complain all the time, right? That they're like, it's so annoying that Ichigo has all these different, he's got the abilities of all the main antagonist groups or whatever, right? And it's like, they like feel like that's like such Deus Ex Machina, pull out of nowhere, where it's like, no, that's been there all along. You just weren't paying attention, is the real reality of it. Like, yes, is it a little bit forced that, this protagonist is capable of doing all these things and rising to all these heights? Maybe, but a lot of the story is about that too. So I think it's fine. Anyway, yeah. Basically, the idea of cleansing hollows and sending the Soul Society, and otherwise, clearly, the idea of cleansing hollows and sending the Soul Society wasn't. There was a difference between that and, the Quincy. But I'm trying to think of it. Whenever it was all one world, you would cleanse a hollow, and then they would reform within the world, assumably, as like this reincarnated self. So I don't know. It's strange to think about hollows and the existence of hollows, like whenever you don't have the trifurcated world, right, where you don't have Hueco Mundo, the human realm, and Soul Society, but they certainly existed then too. So it's interesting to kind of consider the Quincy ideal and all of that. That like, seeing somebody kind of become twisted and become a hollow. And then then basically having a mentality, well, they're a monster now, we should kill them. That maybe makes a little bit more sense. But it does, like, eliminate an entity from the world. So it is pretty severe. Yeah, he says this, like, actions led to their downfall, but as we come to find out with Mayuri, it's probably way more the case that the Shinigami just predated upon them. And it's hard to think about Quincy as like a real like significant force after the 1,000-Year Blood War, after the previous 1,000-Year War and the defeat of Yuha-Bak. We really get the sense of Quincy as being a lot more of like a kind of weaker force that were taken out, and they were kind of shattered. They were already they couldn't like really. I think they didn't have the same sort of unity that Soul Society had. It feels like after that point. Um, yeah, I don't know that there's anything else here. I mean, the hollow bait's kind of interesting. That doesn't really come up again. Um, Clearly it's an item in Bleach Brave Souls, but uh, it looks like a seltzer tablet or something to me. Anyway, but I think it is interesting to early establish Quincy as having all of these tools that can affect hollows and that are like made for combating hollows. So it is kind of neat to think about it in that way. Um, and then especially if you think about like Quincy having this whole outlook that hollows are like these kind of monsters that should be put down, having bait for them makes perfect sense, right? Uh, so yeah, it's kind of interesting to consider in that regard, but this already kind of firmly establishes that, Ishida is this person that has all these different tools for interacting with hollows. The Quincy's have these various like weapons and tools rather than just relying solely on like their spiritual sort of powers, which is again kind of cool. Um, yeah, everybody in Karakura being put in danger is of course something that will come up yet again, time and time again, really with Ichigo. I'm wondering. Let's see. Yeah, I was wondering if Ichigo had yet another, point to bring up. Oh yeah, yeah. I ultimately bring up this idea that, if Ichigo really has the guts to protect people, right? That's ultimately what he's being called about. Um, is this protection of innocence, and if Ichigo really believes that if he can really do that or not, that being another big thing. So there's like a couple of different things that get called out about Ichigo that end up being actual fears of his going forward, regardless of how much he dismisses them. I think that's kind of interesting, but also clearly a lot of the Quincy stuff being set up pretty early here that we really wouldn't delve back into until the battle with Mayuri, and then not yet again until like basically Thousand Year Blood War. So it's really I get a lot of the sense that whenever Kubo went to write that final arc of Bleach, he really reread his own manga and was like, "Oh yeah, I said this, and this. Let me pay off of those in all these different ways." But I felt like all of that was kind of there from the beginning too. I think certainly the idea of Ichigo having Quincy powers is something that was always there, and in a lot of these subtle ways, but especially in that speech from Urahara, like that's almost confirmation. Um, but yeah, that's it. That's all I got. This has been Chapter 36 of Bleach. This has been Bleach Revisited. As always, thank you for watching this video throughout. Thank you for your support, all of that. Any sort of engagement that you give on this video will help share it with other people. So, yeah, obviously, if you can share the video, that's great. But liking it, commenting, and subscribing if you like these videos, all of that helps get this in front of more fans of Bleach and more people that might be interested in this sort of more serious discussion of the series. So, yeah, I'll put that in your hands, but otherwise, thank you so much. I am Karakura Gold. This has been Bleach Revisited, episode 36. As always, spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.